Good afternoon. Welcome back to another episode of the Lord of the Rings LCG Progression Series, and today is a lore and quest guide for Into Ithilien. You've arrived in Ithilien with a sealed message for Faramir, only to learn that he has gone north to defend Caer Andros from massing enemy forces. So if you recall, in Peril in Pelargir, we were trying to escape Pelargir with a message for Faramir from Lord Alcaron. We were attacked by brigands intent on intercepting the message, but were able to escape from the city. The port city of Pelargir is located on the map here, to the west of Mordor and to the south, slightly southeast of Minas Tirith. Far to the south, or southwest, sorry. Far to the southeast of the Shire. So we go look for Faramir in Ithilien, which is where the hobbits Sam and Frodo encountered Faramir in the two towers. Ithilien located here, North Ithilien and South Ithilien. However, we discover he is not there and has gone to Caer Andros. Caer Andros located here. So, we are journeying from Pelargir up through Ithilien to Caer Andros. Probably something like this. Faramir has left a company of rangers in Ithilien tasked on ambushing Southrons as they march toward Caer Andros. Their captain, Kelador, offers to lead you to Caer Andros after the approaching army is destroyed. The Southrons were likely marching on the road. Another word for Southron is Haradrim, and they come from Harad. I don't know if that's the correct pronunciation, but they're known in Westruun as Southrons. So they're one and the same. Two names for the same people. The Haradrim. In the Lord of the Rings, the Two Towers movie, the Haradrim had the Mumakil, and they fought in the Return of the King against the Men of the West outside of Minas Tirith. In the game, they are marching likely from the Harad Road up through Ithilien toward Caer Andros. So be along this road. And we're tasked with assisting the rangers in ambushing and destroying them. This is a branching paths quest. So if you start out the game battle questing, which means using attack instead of willpower. If you complete the stage with Kelador in the staging area, you advance to stage 3A, bypassing stage 2. Kelador is an ally who starts in the stage area automatically committed to the current quest. If you quest unsuccessfully or a character leaves play, you deal 1 damage to Kelador. Character can leave play either by being destroyed or by returning to your hand via sneak attack, for example, among other cards. Anything that causes a character to leave play will deal 1 damage to Kelador. One note, characters only applies to allies or heroes. It doesn't apply to enemies. If Kelador leaves play, remove him from the game. So if you should successfully keep Kelador alive by not questing unsuccessfully, or if you keep him alive and you pass phase 1 with 15 progress, battle questing, you advance to stage 3 the hidden way. If you don't, you advance to stage 2. You also start with an active location, Ithilien Road, and you start with 1 copy of Southron Company in the staging area per player, which is an enemy which has 3 threat, and 5 attack while the current quest card has the battle or siege keyword, which is what you start the game with. While Ithilien Road is the active location, the engagement cost of each enemy is 0. This is a formidable wall for the encounter deck to throw at you to start the game. A 3 threat, 5 attack hero with 0 engagement cost if you can't clear Ithilien Road on turn 1. And since you're battle questing and have at different points to do battle questing, siege, or normal questing, it's hard to build a deck for this quest, but we'll talk about what I believe is the ideal strategy for this quest and the strategy that I used to defeat the quest. I mentioned earlier this is branching paths. You can either move to phase 3 or phase 2. If you move to phase 3 after phase 1, you need 12 progress of regular progress, so that's just using your willpower to quest. When revealed, you take control of all ranger objectives in the staging area, which means Kelador and possibly another Ithilien ranger if it's come out of the deck. It's possible to get another Ithilien ranger in the staging area if you get lucky. There he is, Ithilien Guardian. So you could possibly take control of more than one friendly card. Enemies do not make engagement checks and cannot be optionally engaged, which means they simply build up. You're going on a hidden path, so they're not coming at you, but you do have to deal with them later. They don't go away, so any enemies that come out while you're doing this stage build up in the staging area until you arrive at stage 4, which also requires 15 progress of normal questing, willpower questing. However, if your threat is 37 or higher, approaching Kara Andros gains siege, which then becomes battle questing. And at the end of each round, you raise each player's threat by 2. So there's 2 paths you can take. The second path will go from phase 1 to phase 2, which uses siege questing. Characters use their shields instead of willpower when questing. And it has archery X, where X is the number of players in the game. So in a solo game, it has archery 1. And it requires 9 progress to beat, and you then bypass stage 3 and go to stage 4. So path number 1, if you keep Kelador alive, you go 1, 3, 4, which is battle, normal, and then normal or siege if your threat is too high. Path 2, 1, 2, 4, battle, siege, and then normal or siege. Now, the ideal path in any quest, in my opinion, is going to be the path that requires the least variance, the path that is most consistent. Ideally, you would like all willpower, or all battle, or all siege, because that's easiest to build your deck for. It's very hard to build a deck that can switch from going from battle questing to willpower questing, for example, because most of the cards in the game, especially at this point in the game, that are good at willpower are not also good at battling. Cards usually specialize. The cards that are good at battling are typically tactics cards, and tactics is notoriously weak on willpower, especially at this point in the game's life cycle. So it's very hard to build a game that can build a deck that can do battle questing and willpower questing both, and do both strongly. And that is a big issue in this quest if you go 1, 3, 4, because you need high battle, you need a lot of attack to get over this wall, Ithilien Road, quickly. Because if you can't clear Ithilien Road, you're going to engage the Southern Company turn 1 guaranteed. You may engage 2 enemies if one more comes out of the engagement deck, and it could be another Southern Company, in which case you would just lose. In order to clear Ithilien Road on turn 1, you need at least 4, 5, 6, 7 battle on your heroes to start the game, plus whatever you get from your allies that you play, plus whatever comes out of the engagement deck. It could easily be 10 that you need. That's possible to do. In fact, it's not even really an issue. The issue is, if you play heroes that are capable of doing that, 10 battle questing points on round 1, it's very, very hard to then switch from battling to phase 3, which is normal willpower, because you could play, for example, Bjorn Boromir and something else, and Bjorn and Boromir alone do 8 battle. So all you need is like a Vassal of the Windlord round 1. Or if you even played another hero with 2 attack power, you'd have your 10 right there, and you could go 4, 5, 6, 7, and then you could handle a card with 3, and you'd still get your clearance of Ithilien Road on round 1. And then you don't have to engage the Southern Company. You can take a turn or 2 to get set up. But if you do that, if you play like Bjorn and Boromir, that's a 0 willpower and a 1 willpower character, and so then when you go on the Hidden Way, you're struggling. And therefore, in my opinion, the easier path is to go from 1 to 2. Because again, if you go from 1 to 3 and then you get to 4 and you're under 37 threat, if you do pass 3, given your limited willpower on your heroes, and you get to 4 and you're under 37 threat, you're going to be normal questing again, and raising each player's threat by 2 at the end of each round, and having to deal with all of the enemies that built up in phase 3 all at once. And it's likely to be 1 or 2 or even 3 turns of enemies because of the difficulties of making 12 progress when you have a deck geared toward getting over a battle questing wall. This is a great challenge in true solo. In multiplayer, you can have one deck do battling and one deck do willpower, and then perhaps that was what the quest designers had in mind when they made this, because it's so difficult in true solo to make a deck that can do more than one thing. In my opinion, the easier path is to go from battle to siege, because while it's not common to have cards that have both attack power and willpower, it's much more common to have cards that have both attack power and shields. For example, Boromir is a card that has 2 shields and 3 attack, but only 1 willpower. In addition, if you're playing cards that are tactics cards because you're trying to get over this battle questing wall in phase 1, a lot of tactics cards are also strong in shielding. It's very, very common for tactics cards to either be strong in attack power or shields, but it's very rare for a tactics card to be good at willpower. So if you're building a primarily tactics deck in true solo play in order to get over this battle questing wall, it's much easier to go from battle questing to siege questing than it is from battle questing to willpower questing. And that makes phase 2 a much easier phase to progress to than phase 3, in my opinion. And then if you advance to phase 4 and you're over 37 threat, if you're playing a deck that's focused on battle questing and siege questing, that's actually desirable. You want to be over 37 because then you can just do siege questing, which if you're playing a tactics deck, you'll have greater access to siege questing cards than you will to willpower questing cards. So if you're playing a deck designed to go from battle to siege, siege on the 4th phase would be by far more desirable than willpower questing. This path in true solo is much easier, in my opinion, than going from 1 to 3, because it's much harder to build a tactics deck that can do strong battle questing and then strong willpower questing than it is to build a tactics deck which can do strong battle questing and then strong siege questing. You can, for example, build a battle questing deck with Boromir, Bjorn, which gives you 8, and then another character which gives 2 or 3. I think in my playthrough I used Glorfindel for his 3 attack and to give some access to spirit cards. So I was starting out with 11 battle questing ability without any allies on round 1, which is capable of clearing into Ithilien. But it's not good at willpower questing at all, because I'm using 2 tactics heroes. I only have 4 willpower and I'm using 2 tactics heroes, which means very limited access to willpower questing characters. I was running 1 spirit ally or 1 spirit hero, which gives me 1 spirit resource per round. But 2 2 tactics resources per round, and not only that, not only do I then have greater access to tactics and therefore greater access to siege questers, it also requires less progress to get through stage 2, and you can clear the enemies as you go, which makes stage 4 easier in addition. And in a true solo game, archery of 1 is not a big deal. So that's why I think phase 2 is much easier to progress to than phase 3, because phase 3 requires willpower, which for a tactics deck which is capable of strong battle questing, willpower is much more difficult to come by than shields are. Tactics has access to Winged Guardian with 4 shields and Defender of Ramas with 4 shields, in addition to Support of the Eagles, which gives another 4. Not good willpower cards in tactics at all. So my opinion is, if you're struggling with this quest, try advancing from 1 to 2 instead of 1 to 3. Now the difficulty with that is that means you need to intentionally kill off Kelador, which is not thematic at all. In true solo, I'm not often worried about thematic play, true solo progression style play. I'm just worried about beating the quest. This game is so difficult in true solo progression style play that any way I can beat the quest I'm satisfied with. However, it may bother you to do something like purposely sacrificing Kelador because it's not thematic and it's kind of mean. If we're if we're assigning emotions to Kelador. Anthropomorphizing is how you say that when we attribute human characteristics to our cards. So, poor Kelador, he gets sacrificed in order for us to gain the easier path. He says, I can show you a hidden way, and we say, no, sorry, you're gonna die. In order to sacrifice Kelador on purpose, you need to either quest unsuccessfully, or a character can leave play. So that means using somebody as a chump blocker on purpose. It means playing a card like Vassal of the Windlord, which can leave play. Or you can quest unsuccessfully on purpose. It's not the easiest thing to do, to purposely do these things to sacrifice Kelador in a relatively timely manner. But you can set your deck up to do it, which is what I did. I set my deck up with an eye on making this happen, making Kelador die, so that in a relatively timely manner, so that I could then go down phase 2. And relatively timely, I mean, if you're questing unsuccessfully, you're taking on a lot of threat, and you can run into threat issues, potentially. But if you've got allies that are designed to leave play, that helps quite a bit with getting rid of Kelador. And once he's dead, then you can move on to phase 2 on purpose after you've made your 15 progress. And once you get onto phase 2, you just need 9 progress of shield questing, dealing with 1 archery damage per round, which is not that big a deal. And then, hopefully, you're on to phase 4 with higher than 37 threat. So then you can do battle questing once, or siege questing once again, instead of willpower questing, because your deck will be set up to do siege questing and not willpower questing. Once again, for the reason that tactics is better at doing battle and siege than it is at doing battle and willpower. You do have to raise threat by 2 additional at the end of each round, so you have a limited number of turns. However, at this point in the game, if you've built your deck around siege questing, which I believe I did, with Defender of Ramas, Winged Guardian, and Support of the Eagles, in addition to Boromir with his 2 shields, I found the quest much, much, much easier than trying to proceed along a relatively normal approach of 1, 3, 4. And really, when you do 1, 3, 4, you want to hit 4 with under 37 threat, because if you've set up your deck to do battle and willpower, you don't want to hit stage 4 and then have to do siege also. That's near impossible to set up a deck that can do all 3 of them simultaneously. We have phased quests, or will phase quests that require that, and there's some of the more difficult quests for sure because of the deck building challenge in building a deck that can do all 3 of the attributes well. But if you go 1, 2, and 4, when I tried 1, 3, and 4, I was constantly running into the problem where I took too long to get through Hidden Way because of the poor willpower abilities of my deck. And then when I hit phase 4, I'd have enemies built up that I had to deal with, and while I was dealing with them, my threat would go up over 37, and then I'd be siege questing, and I wouldn't be good at that because I'd set up my deck for battle and willpower. So once I stopped fighting the quest so much and just went with the Kelador dying and then proceeding siege the rest of the way, it was much, much, much easier, and that is my recommendation if you're struggling with this quest, is set up your deck so that Kelador dies and you can do battle and siege questing well, and then you don't need to worry about willpower. And battle and siege questing is much easier to build. You can just use a deck focused primarily on the tactics sphere. And you don't have to worry about the poor willpower abilities of the tactics sphere at this point in the game if you're playing progression style. So, lore-wise, we will have proceeded through Ithilien, destroyed the army there, and we'd be approaching Caer Andros in the final stage. Hopefully that's helpful, or at least entertaining. And my apologies to Kelador for sacrificing him in my playthroughs. Thanks for watching. Further notes for this quest. Let's talk about some of the encounter cards you can have to deal with. Notable enemies: Haradrim Elite. When Haradrim Elite enters play, it makes an immediate attack from the staging area. Pain in the neck. Southron Mercenaries have archery. Archery is... So I don't know if we've seen archery up to this point in the game, but archery is a trait where if it says archery 2, for example, then you must take 2 damage on your characters at the beginning of the combat phase. Archery happens at the beginning of the combat phase. You can place the 2 damage anywhere you like on your characters, but it does have to happen at the beginning of the combat phase. And then we also have the Mumak, who are a major pain in the neck. I don't know that I've ever killed one in one of these quests, because they can't take more than 3 damage each round, so they take 4 rounds to kill of 6 damage per round, and they attack for 7. If you get one out in true solo, in my experience, you're probably going to lose, and you may as well reset. It's hard to leave them in staging because they have 4 threat, and it's really hard to deal with them. Then you also have Southron support. It's doomed 3, which hurts you if you're trying to stay under 37 threat, which I don't recommend. But if you are, this will hurt. And each player must search the encounter deck and discard pile for 1 Herod enemy, the mildest of which is probably Southron Mercenaries. Then you've got some other minor enemies, some other annoyances. Deal 1 damage to each character committed to the quest and a surge. That can be bad. But the big threats are the Haradrim Elite and the Mumak. Thankfully, there's only 1 Mumak, but if he comes out, you're likely to lose as an encounter card. So that is an explanation of the archery trait if you haven't seen archery before, and I don't think up to this point of the game we have seen archery before. That's new. Beginning of the combat phase for archery, and you do add up all the archery values from all the enemies that have archery, and a quest if it does. But in true solo, archery of 1 isn't that big a deal. Thanks for watching.